In this story, we leading up to the story, Bali Maharaj, who happened to be born in the family of a demon, was advised by his guru, Sukacharya, which if we want to translate Sukacharya, we can translate it as Professor White. So his guru, Professor White, suggested to him, do not make any offers to Vamandev because Sukacharya knew who he was. But Bali Maharaj, being ultimately extremely devoted, would do something unusual. He kept his word. Now we're going to talk about that, what it means to keep one's word and how that can be so important. So Bali Maharaj, as we probably all know the story, but he was given 3 steps, and he was a dwarf, a little guy. I'm sure all of you have seen the movie, or most of you have seen it, The Wizard of Oz. And in The Wizard of Oz, they gathered to make that movie every dwarf they could find, because they had the Munchkins, I think they were called. These were all the dwarfs and these small people in the land of Oz. And that was before they had computer enhancement. This was made around, I think, 1939. So they had to find every dwarf they could find, and they gathered all the dwarfs to make the movie. So this was the dwarf full employment program. So dwarfs are generally considered oddballs in one way. In another way, it's a very sort of nasty bodily concept. Somebody has a smaller body to keep them as a second-class citizen. A dwarf was there, and others were thinking, some were thinking, it's just a dwarf. What can a dwarf do? Sukacharya knew, and Bali Maharaj understood. So, dwarf, they can't do anything. So Bali Maharaj said to the dwarf, take 3 steps. I'm the king of heaven now. He had thrown Indra out of heaven. Take 3 steps. What could a dwarf do in 3 steps? Of course, the first 2 steps were everything. There was nothing left. Now, what's the dilemma for Bali Maharaj? At this point in time, he had given his word. Now, how important is our word? Well, to Bali Maharaj, it was everything. When one is situated, one time Prabhupada was with a priest discussing the regulative principles. And then he also discussed with the priest the 4 pillars of Kali Yuga. Can someone share with me what are the 4 pillars of Kali Yuga? I would like to unmute and share the 4 pillars of Kali Yuga.
Truthfulness, cleanliness, austerity, and mercy are the pillars of religion, I've heard.
Yeah, the pillars of religion. Yeah. And by Kali Yuga, I mean the 4 legs of Kali Yuga, of the bull of Kali Yuga. Yeah, exactly. Okay, so he's explaining to this priest the 4 regulative principles, and he's explaining the 4 pillars of religiosity, or the 4 legs of irreligiosity, the opposite of the 4 pillars. So he's explaining that. And then then the priest says, well, interesting question. He says, well, you have these 4 pillars and you have the 4 regulative principles, but how does lying fit in? It's one of the 4 pillars of religiosity, but none of the regulative principles say to tell the truth. Can anyone guess what Prabhupada's answer would have been? Any guesses here? A very intelligent question by the priest. He was trying to connect the 4 regulative principles with the 4 pillars. Well, Prabhupada said, lying, and particularly he asked about lying. The priest asked about lying. How does lying fit in with the regulative principles? And Prabhupada said, all 4 of the principles involve lying. Because you're being, and he was talking about priests. If a priest is represent the pillars of religiosity, and he's not following the regulative principles, then he's a hypocrite. In other words, a liar. That all of them involve untruth. So it's that important. So when we say there are 4 legs of the bull of Dharma, and the last one, there's truthfulness, mercy, cleanliness. I'm getting a brain block. What's the 4th, Adi?
Mercifulness.
No, I said mercifulness, truthfulness, cleanliness,
truthfulness, and austerity.
Austerity. Thank you. Thank you. You can see I forget that one because I don't like austerity. So it's an easy one to forget. In this when Parikshit saw the cow bull being attacked by Kali, and down to 1 leg, and the last leg was truthfulness. In other words, in Kali Yuga, it's very hard to be merciful. I mean, look at all of us. We try to be merciful, but in our highly industrialized society, none of us are very merciful to nature. I mean, just where we get our energy, what it takes to get the materials to go into our computer screen, the exploitation that occurs. It's very, very difficult to be truly merciful. Very difficult to be austere when there's so much facility available. But truthfulness, last leg of Kali Yuga, at least we can be truthful, and truthfulness is so critically important. Krishna talks about in the Gita. Can somebody give me the verse where Krishna talks about what it's like to speak honestly? What does honest speaking mean? Somebody know that?
Be truthful and beneficial.
Yeah. That which is spoken in the mode of goodness is truthful and beneficial. In other words, it helps others. Now, does this mean that if somebody is, let's say, somebody was in a terrible accident and their whole face is messed up, and you walk up to them and say, "My God, what happened to you? You are so ugly." Now, that may be truthful, but it is not beneficial. There's no benefit in it. We find some people are very proud of the truth. They walk around criticizing others. I'm sure some of you have seen people like that. "Oh, Prabhu, you were not sitting very straight for your japa. This is not very good. You are going to hell." Yeah, we have in the chat the exact verse from the Gita. So truthfulness requires it being beneficial, not agitating to others. So there's a whole discussion we can have on what actually is truthfulness. So here, Bali Maharaj was exhibiting the symptoms of being an honest man. He gave 3 steps, and he said, I must live up to my vow. Put your 3rd step on my head, because you've taken everything, but you haven't taken me yet. So put your 3rd step on my head. And even if that means I go to a hellish planet, I don't mind, because I want to be honest. Now, let's talk a little bit about what it means to be honest. We will, I'm going to ask a question. Was Krishna always honest? Let's have some answers on this. Was Krishna honest?
Well, there's truth with a capital T.
Okay.
The absolute truth, which is true for everyone everywhere at all times. And then there's relative truth, which is like, how old are you? Where are you? What's the room temperature? What's the date? And these things change with time and circumstance and change from person to person. And Krishna is the absolute truth and is presenting himself and presenting what's reality for all of us. When you say, as you sow, so shall you reap. That was true thousands of years ago when Jesus spoke halfway around the world. And it's true here. And if we go,
you didn't answer my question. Was Krishna himself speaking? Was he always truthful?
The absolute truth.
Absolute truth. Is there a time when he was relatively untruthful?
Prabhu, what comes to my mind is that he broke his promise about not participating in the battle.
Yeah, that's one example. It's a good example.
He told Yudhisthira to lie.
And Yudhisthira never lied. What did he tell Yudhisthira to lie about? Asvatthama. Yes. Say Asvatthama was dead, but it was Asvatthama the elephant, not the warrior, to kind of discourage the other side. So if Krishna, who's the supreme personality of Godhead, cannot always be truthful, how can we be truthful? Now, this creates an interesting issue. For example, Krishna has been known in the more intimate leelas to run out at night into the forest to dance with the gopis. Now, if I would start gathering the ladies from the Bhakti Center and say, will you meet me at Central Park at 2 a.m. so we could dance, I would be considered the greatest debaucher if I did something like that. All kinds of horrible things would happen to me because it would be considered just most heinous that someone who's considered on the board of directors inviting all the ladies to a midnight rendezvous in Central Park. And besides the fact that you may get mugged anyway, but I would be considered just, but Krishna does that and it's okay. So what is the standard of behavior and how can we as devotees follow someone who doesn't stick to his word, it seems, and does all kinds of contradictory things? Can somebody help me with this dilemma? I don't want to bloop today, but I need an answer to this.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu. What comes to my mind is that maybe whatever promotes, cultivates, fosters our loving relationship with Krishna can be considered truth, maybe.
Okay, that's one way to look at it. That helps. What's in the, any more comments on this? It's a very important question and it's relevant here, and you'll see soon how it's even more relevant. Any other thoughts on this? I realize 7 o'clock is a little early, but let's have some more comments. Any other thoughts? Yeah, Jenya Prabhu.
Well, when Krishna is in his intimate pastimes in Vrindavan, he's displaying his ability to kind of break the rules of human life. But when he's, and it's more acceptable in one sense because he's a child from the standpoint of conventional morality. But when Krishna is an adult, he actually, as he says in the Gita, sets the example for proper behavior. And so he does, in one sense, follow all of the rules. And the examples we find of Krishna breaking his word, so to speak, are on the battlefield in the Mahabharata, where there are a set of mitigating circumstances where many Dharma has already been transgressed in so many ways. And so Krishna is kind of threading this really delicate line between how to basically preserve the higher earthly dharma of winning this war for the right side and not giving in to kind of the very rigid conception of truth conceived of by people like Bhishma Dev. But then also, he's not completely suggesting to lie on every occasion and cheat on every occasion. He has to kind of craft these very particular solutions for each moment of time in the battle. So I think we can find Krishna's justice in those moments.
Yeah. So this gets into a deep ethical issue. And the ethical issue comes down, is it okay to lie sometimes? Is it okay to be dishonest? There was, in the early days of the movement, Prabhupada would use an English expression. And the English expression was, we shall get this accomplished by hook or crook. And some devotees thought that, well, hook, we know what a hook is. Captain Hook has one on his hand. We all know what a hook is. And a crook, meaning you will do something in some, deceitful, cheating way. It's okay to cheat in order to accomplish a higher purpose. Now, does somebody know what the expression hook or crook really means? Anybody know? Adi, you know that one?
Nope.
No. You've heard devotees use the expression?
Of course.
Yeah. Okay. Let me see.
A police officer trying to stop somebody speeding might exceed the speed limit.
Yeah.
Authorized.
Hook or crook is an English phrase. I'm looking. Wikipedia says by any means necessary, but where it comes from is the crook doesn't mean the crook doesn't mean a thief. The crook is these are shepherd's terms. So how does a shepherd get its captured sheep? By a hook or crook is another device to capture sheep. It's just a device. It has nothing to do with the word crook as used to a thief. So by hook or crook means do what's practical. It doesn't mean violate every moral law. So in the early days of the movement, when everyone was under 30 and didn't know what the heck we were doing, that expression became problematic because it could justify all kinds of things. And Prabhupada said it, but he was giving an old English expression, not talking about being a crook, talking about being practical, utility is the principle. But that didn't mean we violate all religious principles. So now we're back to the question. Did Krishna behave immorally and set a bad example for us? This issue was dealt with by Socrates in one of his dialogues. I think it's Euthyphro, but I may get that mixed up. The question was asked, is something right because they had all the demigods, their gods they looked at. Is something right because the gods say so, or is something, or do the gods say what is right? In other words, something is intrinsically right and therefore the gods are repeating it, or just because the god says it, they made it right. It was a very interesting question asked. And this takes us back to what Adi said about truth with a capital T. Since Krishna is acting always for the benefit of everyone, even if Krishna would violate common moral grounds, he's still doing it for the benefit of everyone without any discrepancy. If I would try to violate common moral rules for the benefit of anyone, I'm not pure enough to say it would be done without any discrepancy whatsoever.
Sure.
So if Krishna would invite the gopis to the forest, it's done with all the purest of love, without even a hint of material lust or any of the symptoms that any of us might exhibit. It's done at the purest level. So what Adi said about the capital T truth is a correct way to look at it. Now, when Krishna is, when we have the Asvatthama story in which Yudhishthira is induced to lie by Krishna, again, there is such a higher purpose. So, and Prabhupada said to me one time, said, if you try to approach a very rich man, he gave the example, the richest man in India at that time was a fellow named Birla. He said, if you try to approach Birla, it'd be very, very difficult. But if you happen to see Birla's son and you give him a 2-cent candy, then you're going to win the attention of Birla right away. Now we might say, is that being totally honest? I'm giving the boy the candy just to get to his father. But again, Prabhupada was saying that's a practical thing. Prabhupada said to the scientists at the BI, the scientists that you're meeting, they're very, very proud people. Very, very proud. And therefore, and Prabhupada said, but they've achieved a lot. So treat them with that respect. Treat them with the utmost respect. Srup Damodar Maharaj was so superbly expert at that. Treat them with great respect. In other words, I could walk up to the scientists as I meet scientists. I know, Mr. Scientist, before I put my boot into your ugly face, I want to tell you how stupid you are to think that life comes from matter. And I give an example. I was once at a scientific conference, and there was one big scientist who I wanted to talk to about an important question. And I happened to find him for a brief moment alone, very big shot. So he's always surrounded by people. So I walk up to him and, say to him, Professor Full of It, or whatever his name was. Professor Full of It, I wanted to ask you this question. And he gave me attention, and I asked him the question. And he started answering. He answered, he said, that's a very important question. So I really had his attention. It was an important question. And he was about to answer it. And this very pretty lady walked by. And in the middle of his question, he says, well, and the answer to your question, and he turns his head, starts gawking at her, and loses his whole tract of all his attention. And he didn't even know where he was anymore. He got so attracted just because a pretty lady walked by. And I realized it was a very good experience for me, because I had this image that these high professors and very famous, intelligent people actually know what the heck they're talking about. And that bursted that image forever. It was very helpful for me. It helped me be a little more cynical about these things. But at the same time, if I turned to him and said, by the way, Professor so-and-so, the difference between you and a lusty dog is you're on 2 legs and they're on 4 legs. That would be a very truthful statement, but it would not be beneficial. It would be agitating, and it would ruin all relationships. So there's a saying, discretion is a better part of valor. So part of truthfulness is to use discretion. And there was a story given. There was once a sadhu meditating in the woods, and a man came running past, and he said, some dacoits, thieves, are chasing me. Please don't tell them which way I went, because they're going to kill me. So then he ran on, and then the thieves came and they said to the sadhu, did you see somebody run by? And the sadhu says, yes. And they go, which way did he go? And the sadhu pointed the way he went. Because this sadhu would only tell the truth. That was his vow. And then what happened? The dacoits went, caught him, and killed him. For whatever reason, they want to kill this man. And later, when this sadhu, his time to leave came, and he couldn't understand, with all his piety and austerity, why he was actually going to a hellish place. It didn't seem right that he would be cursed to a hellish existence, because he was guilty of putting that sadhu to death. So sometimes we have to consider, in truthfulness, what is the higher purpose? What are we doing? So if we are at the temple, we're working the front desk of the Bhakti Center, and somebody runs in and there's some thieves chasing them, and the person says, I'm going to hide out on the roof. And then the thieves come in and they ask us, did you see somebody come in? And we say, yes. And they go, where did they go? And we say, they're hiding on the 6th floor roof. Would that be an example of a Brahmin being honest, or an example of a Brahmin being an idiot? So there are relative morals and absolute morals. Now, back to this verse. In this verse, so Bali Maharaj told the truth, and then he said, and very important, I do not fear you're going to take everything away from me. I don't care being arrested by the ropes of Varuna. I don't care about that. I don't care about going to a hellish life. I don't care. But I fear defamation. I fear that I will be known as a liar because I didn't tell the truth. And I gave you 3 steps, you didn't take it. So generally, as Brahmins, as those who are trying to achieve, I don't like using the word Brahmins and labeling so much. I much prefer to say those of us who have Brahminical aspirations, we tell the truth, yet at the same time, because we don't want to be defamed as a liar, at the same time, we do it in such a way that the truth is pleasing and beneficial to others. So that's some of what's going on here. Every verse in this chapter has so much depth to it. We could go on class after class, just even on one verse. But at this point, there's 5 minutes left. So I'm going to pause for comments, criticisms, reflections, something you learned or something you disagree with. Who would like to unmute and say something? Help yourself.
Of course, our ultimate criteria is, what does Krishna want us to do? And if Krishna asks you to do something that you'll be defamed for, we accept it, right? What St. Paul said, for me, all things are legal, but not everything is expedient. So when we have a goal of presenting the absolute truth or pleasing Krishna, it might be sometimes when conventional morality, that this is an exception to the rule, because that's what Krishna is asking us to do. In one sense, this verse about, I don't want to be defamed, that might also be not the highest motivation. Being defamed as being somebody who's not listening to what Krishna is asking you to do, that might be a good one. But just defamation in general is not the highest. Avoiding defamation is not the highest. People criticize the devotees. They say that we're beggars. They say that we're, just leeching off society. They say that, why don't you get a real job? But we know we have a spiritual master. He's given us instruction, and we're happy to follow it in fame or infamy, heat or cold, right? Success or failure. We do this for Krishna's pleasure. We're attached to the endeavor, not the result.
Yeah, we can see in many areas, things are not black and white. In the West, we tend to have digital brains. Digital means zeros and ones, either yes or no. But in Eastern philosophy, be it coming from the Chinese traditions, the Indian traditions, much more nuances, much more, to use the computer analogy, an analog computer, not a digital computer. Like modern radios, you press a button and it immediately goes to the next live channel. But in the old radios, you had to tune it. You had to turn the knob and fine tune it. So similarly, the Eastern point of view is very much into fine tuning, into nuances. So the nuances mean a whole lot. It's not black and white. Generally, as a devotee, and Prabhupada has given instruction many times, we're to be gentlemen and ladies. We're to present ourselves as ideal people in society, set the good example. And then sometimes for the sake of service, we may deviate from that. But when we deviate from it, it should always be clearly motivated by the highest principle possible. And if it's not, we have to err on the side of following common morality. Because even Krishna says in the Gita that if I did not set the example of common morality, the whole world would fall apart. Even if I'm God, I have to set that example. So as devotees, it behooves us to always set the highest example of morality. At the same time, for the sake of service, sometimes we may have to do things. There was one time Prabhupada was visiting New Taliban, and he was in New Orleans, and then the next morning he went to see New Taliban, the farm in Mississippi. So after he gave class at the temple, Prabhupada was leaving, and it was a very foggy day. It was so foggy that you probably couldn't see the nose in front of your face. Terribly foggy. So I jumped in a van with other devotees, and they threw Prabhupada's Vyasa-san in there. President New Taliban says, can you get here before Prabhupada? Because we don't have a proper Vyasa-san. So we jumped, Prabhupada's car left. Then we put the Vyasa-san in this van and took off. And then we're driving down this highway as fast as the driver could drive. And then you couldn't see your hood ornament practically. It was so foggy because it's swampy there. So you get terrible fog certain times of year. And we passed Prabhupada on the road. And we didn't even know we passed Prabhupada. It was so foggy. And then Prabhupada comments to his driver, "What kind of crazy people are driving like this on the highway?" And of course, it was us. What kind of crazy nuts is that to drive like this? And we didn't even know. We didn't even see his car in the next lane. And so that's an example of us trying to do be stupid in the name of service. And obviously, my lesson when I heard, I wasn't the driver, but I was still in the car, so I have some responsibility. And my lesson from that, when I heard what Prabhupada said, is don't be stupid in the name of service. Prabhupada could have sat on an ordinary chair rather than, who knows, we could have crashed into Prabhupada's car. Just such craziness. So these things happen. And so it requires a real higher intelligence to know when to be truthful and when to possibly deviate. And here it's talking about avoiding defamation. And as devotees, it really hurts. I do ISKCON Resolve. And one of the principles I have in trying to come up with solutions is to make sure that devotees can keep their honor. I just did a major mediation for the GBC involving a lot of well-known senior devotees were in a dispute over an issue. And in order to understand better what to do with this complex issue, I went and interviewed a lot of Prabhupada's servants. Raj Bihari and I did this together. People such as Hari Sari and Shruti Kirti and others who spent a lot, Giriraj Swami, spent a lot of time with Prabhupada. And we gave them, without breaking the confidentiality of what we're working on, we gave them examples. We gave them a rough outline of the circumstance we're dealing with. And there was some allegation of violating civil law and hurting the movement. That was the allegation. And done for the intent of some higher purpose. So we asked all the servants, what did Prabhupada do in similar circumstances? Curious, isn't it? What did Prabhupada do when devotees violated the law? They had, and maybe in some cases even stole money. And in the case I was dealing with, no one was personally profiting, but we also explored cases in which people personally profited. I was curious, what did Prabhupada do? In every case but one, Prabhupada did the same thing. In one case in India, Prabhupada actually had the law enforcement come because he felt the person was incorrigible and that needed to be done. Every single other case, and there was many of them, Prabhupada's principle was, let's learn from the mistake. That was, let's not let this happen again. Let's do what we need to do, but don't do it in a way that defames the person who did it. The person who made the mistake, either with good intention or in some cases, really bad intention, do not defame them. One time, one sannyas was having trouble with his rounds or some spiritual issue, and Prabhupada walked by in Denver, the brahmachari ashram, and he overheard them gossiping. Oh, so-and-so Swami this, so-and-so Swami is doing that. And Prabhupada was so furious. He said, now that person will never be able to come back because you're defaming him. So this idea of defamation, that we have to avoid defamation, is such a crucial principle of behavior among devotees. And my study in which I looked at this, in which Prabhupada's one of his guiding principles in dealing with these discrepancies is, do not defame the person who did it. So if we find that somebody has some discrepancy, we have to learn from Bali Maharaj how important it is to deal with it without defaming that person. And sometimes we will, in the name of truth, try to defame somebody. Oh, we have to tell the truth. We're Brahmins. But an even higher principle than that is not to defame someone in the name of truth. And that's one of the lessons being learned here, because Bali Maharaj had to act on the principle of truth to give his head, yet his greatest fear was defamation by not telling the truth. So a higher principle than the truth is even defamation. The lesson for me is, if a devotee has a discrepancy, let's say Bali Maharaj had a discrepancy, obviously not really, but for the sake of the story, that he couldn't keep his word, we have to be very careful not to never defame that person. So with that, our time is up. That's the point I was hoping to make today. I'm sorry if I took a roundabout way to get there. Does anybody have any last questions or comments?
Hare Krishna Prabhu. Yeah,
Yes.
I did have one question about that verse, that the truth verse, where the statements that we make should be both truthful and beneficial. So my question is, because during your talk you seem to kind of a little bit conflate the two. So, but because they are mentioned individually, I'm wondering if, they are meant to be standalone qualities. And if so, then what would truth actually mean, independent of beneficial, in that verse?
You're a good thinker to ask that question. A very good thinker for that. We're a little short of time for a detailed answer, but so I'll give the short answer. We can, if we're going to speak the truth to someone, it has to be in a way that benefits them. If we're speaking the truth just because I want to be known for speaking the truth, that's out of pride, and that's mode of passion. But truth spoken in the mode of goodness, and that's what we're talking about in this chapter of the Gita. Truth spoken in the mode of goodness is such that it does some benefit for the person. So, and we have to know that person, know what we're doing. Prabhupada was expert at this. He could walk up to someone and say the truth, and sometimes in real cutting ways, and sometimes funny ways, and he could do it because the face is a mirror of the mind, and he was so expert at reading faces that he knew what would be beneficial. One lady reporter asked him a wise guy question: "Why do you shave your head?" Prabhupada gave such a brilliant answer. "Well, why do you shave your legs? Better have a cool head and warm legs." So Prabhupada could give these very good, beneficial answers. And I personally witnessed he did it with such charm that it was very rare for anybody to feel that they were offended. And if they did feel they were offended, that's probably what the person needed. Now, in my own life, I'm a little more cautious. I'm not Prabhupada. I can't read people's faces like Prabhupada could. So in my own moral compass, I try to err on the side of being sure that what I'm speaking is beneficial. And I make mistakes that way. And when I do make mistakes, I have to apologize for it. And I recently had an example where some devotee came to me, "So-and-so's mad at you." I said, "Oh, why is that? I haven't seen so-and-so in 10 years. Well, 30 years ago, you confronted that person. And my first reaction was, tell him to get a life and get over it. It was 30 years ago. And what happened is that I was running a gurukul, and that person was speeding on the property, and there were children just playing all over. And so I really chastised him heavily. But apparently I was too heavy. And my first reaction was, my God, tell the guy to get over it and stop being a jerk. And then I thought about it, and I said, well, I have to get over it and stop being a jerk. If it bothered that person for 30 years, then I must have been too heavy. So I did my apology. So when I spoke the truth, I was doing it with a higher purpose to protect the children, but I did speak it too harshly, and I had to apologize for it. There's a story Yamuna told me. It's not so well known. Tamal Krishna Maharaj could be quite heavy, and was Prabhupada's most effective, best manager ever. I mean, I say that unabashedly. And in the early 70s in Vrindavan, it was extremely austere. I mean, I lived in India during that time period, and I mean, it was very, very austere. When you have a Western body, just to keep body and soul together, no hot water. Where I live, no windows, mosquitoes everywhere. Our bodies weren't used to, couldn't drink the water. I mean, it was very, very austere conditions. And Yamuna went up to Tamal Krishna Maharaj around year 2000 and said to him, Maharaj, you were so heavy with me in Vrindavan. And Tamal Krishna Maharaj said, apologize profusely. He was actually a very humble person. I had that outward heavy appearance, but actually a very, very humble person. And he apologized profusely. And then he said words that really kind of shocked me. It may not seem so shocking, but as Yamuna told me the story, he said, Yamuna, I'm going to tell you something that may even hurt you more. He said, you remember this, what happened 30 years ago, and it's still bothering you. I can't even remember what I did to you. So for 30 years, it bothered you, and I can't even remember what I did. I hope that doesn't hurt you more. But if I remembered everything I did for the sake of management, all the people I hurt for the sake of getting things done for Prabhupada, I would simply keel over and die on the spot. And those words, when Yamuna told me that, it went right through me. I understood how difficult it is to make these decisions, because he had to, in this huge austerity of India, get things done, and sometimes had to be heavy to do it. And later on, he took the last year of his life apologizing for doing these things. So these are tough decisions we have to make. We have to protect people's, we don't want to defame people. We don't want to hurt people, yet we have to get things done. And sometimes the decisions seem impossible to do. So the secret of doing it is we do the best we can and don't be afraid to say, I'm sorry, when somebody really was hurt by it. That requires an immense amount of motive goodness. Tamal Krishna Maharaj had that, so he could do it. Even though he admitted he had to act in a mode of passion to get things done. So many good lessons to be learned here. But with that, I think I'm way over time now, and then I'm going to have a hook or a crook yank me away in a moment. So I'll have to stop here. Okay, thank you very much for listening. If I rambled too much, I apologize. These points are very near and dear to me, and so there's much that can be said. Hare Krishna.